Got my happy lawyer hat on this morning. Hello, hello, hello. It's John Miller, founding attorney of Rock Solid Law. It's early 2021, and we are in a new era, and our firm is celebrating 30 years of practice, which is pretty darn exciting. This morning, we're going to talk about, I've titled it Sandcastles, and observations on laws that affect living at the beaches was the name of the article I published of the same name recently, which can be found at our website, www.rocksolidlaw.com. But today, particularly, I want to talk about what happens in a closing. And this will live permanently on our website, so it's a good reference for people to be able to know what's going to happen when they come in, particularly those first-time people who are going through the process for the first time. So, the saying is old, our home is our castle. And I think nothing more particularly defines we Floridians as our choice to live on this peninsula of sand and limestone. And so therefore, our homes being our castles, I always talk in terms of sand castles, castles in the sand, in our home ownership being a defining a term of our lives, really, in many ways. So there are going to be, depending on where the property being closed is located, various different rules, ordinances, and other things in play. And so we that are professionals in the real estate and title industry know what those are, how to gather the information, how to get you smoothly through your closing, so that you're either selling your place to move on in your life, or perhaps you are purchasing the home. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I always say that home ownership is the cornerstone of the American dream. Among those rights, which we boldly stated when we formed our new country, was the right of common people like you and me to own a home. And therefore, I truly believe that home ownership is the cornerstone of that dream. And one of the reasons that I really enjoy practicing in the area of real estate. Prior to that time, European descendants, most people worked for the Lord of the Manor and never had a hope of owning their own home. The continent of Africa and indeed the Americas had no concept of individual ownership of land at the time. You might think, oh, well, Egypt's in northern Africa. Yes, but who owned that for centuries? The pharaohs. It was the people in charge. It was the kings and it was the nobility, not common people. So a real distinguishing factor about this great experiment that we call the United States of America is the fact that we do have the ability to own homes. My personal family history is a little interesting in this point. Many of my family settled on this continent before the Revolutionary War, and a good number of them actually fought in the Revolutionary War. And I always pause there and say, on both sides. You see, there was one young man who was a farm boy in Bavaria, which is part of Germany, and the Lord of the Manor made a deal to take money from some cousins in England, I would guess. I use the cousins term not literally, but figuratively. And the lords got paid, and the young men went off and became mercenaries. So you've probably heard in history of the Hessian mercenaries who fought honorably for England here in America. This young man, whose last name in Germany was Engelbrecht and who became Engelbright here in America, was captured at the Battle of York. And at the end of the war was given the opportunity to return to England, although he was German, or to stay in Maryland, and basically got a 40 acres and a mule deal. And other than those patriots who fought to form our country, he was one of the first to receive citizenship as a part of his pledge to remain an American, become an American citizen. So really, his home all the way down to our homes are a vital part of the American dream and of what it means to be American. I think that's an important part about learning about or thinking about why homeownership is important. So what I've said in my article, and I'll repeat today, is that this is like having a peek behind the curtain, the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz, right? We're going to throw back the curtain and tell you what all goes on. So every closing is going to be different depending on what office you pick. At Rock Solid Law, we choose to be very professional, but we also choose to have a good time and to try to make the closing process as joyful as possible and as pleasant as possible. Often, or I should not say often, sometimes people are moving on and didn't want to, maybe like a divorce situation, selling that home as a result of the dissolution decree. But in most instances, people are moving on with their lives. They've chosen a new home, and both sides of the table are happy. We do our best to keep everyone happy, even when we have to resolve minor disputes to get the thing closed. And I think I have been closing loans since 1991, and I think our realtor friends would tell you that one of my unique abilities is getting people to the table and to finalize the deal that they have reached in their contract. So we're going to talk a lot about the different players in a closing. And the first, of course, will be the law firm or title company, who's in charge of providing good title, taking care of the parties, the realtors, and the lenders, among others. So communication is the key component here. We prefer to be able to communicate directly with the parties. Of course, we always communicate directly with our realtors and, of necessity, a lender if one is involved in the transaction. So a whole lot goes on before the actual date of the closing. Really, the closing is the final buttoning up at the end of the process. So the attorney has called for a commitment, which is a chain of the title, so that we can review whether there is good and clear title or we need to resolve issues on the title so that that buyer gets absolute fee simple, merchantable title, which is insurable by a title policy. So the attorney has performed a review of that and determined which things need to be taken care of, which might hold up the closing or not allow the closing to happen. So those things will be done beforehand. Clearing liens. A lot of times somebody's had some work done on their property and didn't properly close a notice of commencement or something like that. These are the kinds of things we work on in that regard. So it's really important that someone qualified and knowledgeable in the law of real estate perform that review so that the parties can be assured that their transaction or transfer is completed properly. So how does it occur that a particular office is chosen? I see the sun's come out and shining on my face a little bit, so maybe I'll move back. How does it happen that a particular office is closed? Well, the contract's going to say who gets to choose where it happens. Now, typically, that's the person who's paying for the title insurance policy. And in most of Florida, that is the seller. Here in Duval County and in most of the counties of Northeast Florida, it's the seller. So the seller is going to choose where to go, and it's either they or their real estate agent who has chosen Rock Solid Law for that job. So the closing attorney is going to work with processors and closers in the firm and collaborate with the owner, the buyer, the realtors, the lenders, the association managers, the title underwriter, and potentially other parties in order to coordinate all that coming together. So there's a lot of bow tying that is a part of this process. So what does the seller care about in the transaction? The seller cares that they walk out of there with their money. They want to transfer good title so that they can receive payment from the sale. And the attorney, closing agent, is acting as an escrow agent so that all the money comes in and doesn't go anywhere until we're sure good title is ready to transfer. once everything has been accomplished, a deed's been signed, and all the other documents have been executed, then and only then can we transfer the money to the seller. And it must be to the seller, the party who sold the property. All right, the buyer, what's the buyer want? Buyer wants to get in their house, right? Or in the case of commercial property, into their building. The buyer's interested in receiving clear title. They're not really thinking about that at that point in time. So we must be there to protect them and make sure that they get good, fee simple, clear title so that they own that property without dispute in the future. And you'd be amazed at the disputes which occur. I told you I have 30 years on my own. I had another 7 years of practice before that, during part of which time I was a trial lawyer. So I have seen disputes over easements, over fences and buildings built across a lot line. And right now I'm dealing with an aggressive bill collector who has filed a lien on a property, probably wrongfully, but they know that they can extort a settlement because the fellow needs to get to sell his house. So there's lots and lots of things that need to be done, and almost all happen behind the scenes. So that buyer wants clear title and the keys to their new home, right? Usually they're interested in leaving the closing in time to meet the movers, who are often sitting in the driveway while we're trying to finish up the transaction. A little pressure there, right? So we try to do a really good job of getting all that done and getting folks over to meet those movers once the transaction is finished. The realtors are an absolute key component on those transactions they're involved in. And the realtor's interest is to be sure that the contract that they have prepared, or which we have prepared for them in some instances, is properly closed so that all the parties are satisfied, and that the seller gets their money and the buyer gets their house, and the realtor or the brokerage will be paid the commission check that is owed for helping that seller find that buyer, procuring that buyer, and that we disperse everything properly so they don't ever have to think about this again. Often, in non-pandemic times especially, realtors attend the closings. We love having the realtors there. They often are able to answer questions about the property itself that we're not privy to and don't know, because we almost never, it's just coincidental if we ever see the property. So the realtor is wonderful when they attend the closing. And let me say this for my realtor friends. The best closings happen when I've got professional realtors on both sides of the transaction, because they have done everything in advance of the closing they can do to get the parties to complete all their tasks, so that there's nothing to do at the closing but to take care of the formalities of document execution. So a big shout out and props to the realtors out there who do an outstanding job of getting their clients' transactions prepared to get to us. To have a professional realtor to work with on a transaction is one of the true blessings in my life. And we are so fortunate to work with a great group of realtors. And of course, if anybody out there needs a realtor, I'm happy to give a referral on that. Just contact me. So what's the lender's interest? The lender is putting the money out so the buyer can purchase this house in a transaction where there is a lender. So what they care about is being in a first priority position. What's that mean? That means that their mortgage is recorded, so it has nothing ahead of it with respect to the property, right? So sometimes we have to subordinate a pre-existing item. And that means make sure that that mortgage is in the first position. The lender is also interested in having all of the loan documents executed properly. So that falls on your closing attorney. And having the proper collateralization for their loan. Otherwise, if it's something more than a mortgage as well. So it's really important. The laws are very specific on how a document like a mortgage has to be executed in order that it can be recorded in our public records. So we always assure that those legal necessities are resolved. That mortgage will remain a lien against the property until that particular note is paid back in full. The attorney has a fiduciary responsibility to the lender to make sure the lien is perfected and indeed that the title is insurable. So there will be a title insurance policy in favor in every transaction of the buyer. That's called an owner's policy. And there will be a policy additionally, which is called simultaneous issue, in favor of the lender. So that's two different and separate policies that are issued at every closing that we do in our office. So what about the attorney, you ask? You may have inferred some of these things already. It's possible that the attorney has been hired to represent one of the parties. It is possible that the attorney may be acting as the escrow agent. Some real estate brokers prefer to hold the escrow deposit. Some request that we do. So the attorney has to account for all of the funds that have been received in the closing process and to disperse them properly. The attorney is likely the title agent on the transaction and therefore will be the one actually signing, checking down the commitment of title and ultimately signing the policies of insurance. In some instances, there may need to be an escrow for such things as repairs post-closing. And the attorney may additionally be hired to escrow the funds that are to be used to, for instance, repair a window. The last thing that I think is really important in having an attorney involved in a closing is the attorney can explain the law as it applies to the transaction and resolve issues the clients, the closing parties have in their minds about how the law is applicable to their particular closing. In my 30-year experience, I have found that to be very important. So closing day comes. Often the parties are going to be in the same room together. In pandemic times, that it happens less commonly. It's really up to the parties, the realtors and the lender. A lot of times the lender will attend. A lot of times the realtors, as I said earlier, will be in the room. We love having the mortgage lenders in the room with us because they can explain the specific terms of the loan if the client doesn't understand in a way that we are not really able to do so. We can explain the legalities, but not the actual loan. So typically we start with the ALTA settlement statement and go through all the costs for each of the parties and then circulate that for signature by each of them. Then we would proceed through the lending package we've coordinated with the bank to create, and the buyers will execute that document. Occasionally there's one or two documents for the seller in that, after which we will have both buyers and sellers execute the documents from the title underwriter and from the law firm to complete the transaction. So in conclusion, I highly recommend that parties to a closing transaction hire an attorney to do that transaction for all the reasons I said before, but particularly because we have taken the time in law school and, of course, through continuing legal education to really know the title issues that are out there and to be able to navigate that maze for the participants of the party. So I would conclude that you should educate yourself before buying or selling a home, and particularly recommend that you use an attorney in your closing, because with a properly conducted closing, all parties come out winners. And of course, here at Rock Solid Law, we go for the win-win situation in all instances. So I would like, of course, for you to consider us to manage your closing. And I would offer 1/2 off of our closing fee to anyone who contacts the firm this month, that's January 2021, and use the code Sandcastles. I certainly appreciate your spending time with me today. And always, if there are any questions, you can ask them now, or you can write us at questions@Rock Solid Law. Not seeing any questions pop up, so I will leave you on this beautiful day to enjoy yourselves, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much. This is John Miller, founding attorney, Rock Solid Law.